Welcome to our channel. September 1945, Cam Acres, New Orleans, Louisiana. Corporal Elsa Brewer stood at the gate of the detention facility staring at the paper pass in her hands, like it might disappear if she blinked. Behind her, 15 other German women prisoners clustered together, equally stunned, equally uncertain. "This is a trick," whispered Margaret Cole, former Luftwaffe communications officer. "Americans don't just let prisoners walk free in their cities." "Not free," corrected Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, the young American officer assigned as their escort. "Supervised cultural exchange. You'll be accompanied at all times, you'll return by 2200 hours, and you'll remain within designated areas." "But yes," she smiled slightly, "you're going into New Orleans." Elsa read the pass again. Cultural Orientation Program. Prisoner Nana 2847 authorized for supervised city access. Purpose, educational integration. Educational integration. 3 months ago Elsa had been manning anti-aircraft batteries outside Berlin. 2 months ago she'd surrendered to American forces and been shipped across the Atlantic in a cargo hold. 1 month ago she'd arrived at Cam Acres expecting hard labor and harsh treatment. Instead, she'd found clean barracks, adequate food, and now this permission to walk the streets of an enemy city. "Why?" Elsa asked Morrison directly. "Why allow this?" Morrison's expression turned thoughtful. "Because the war is over, because you're going to be repatriated eventually and the State Department thinks exposure to American culture might help with reconstruction efforts." She paused. "And because someone in Washington thinks German women might actually listen, unlike the men in the other camps who still think Hitler's hiding somewhere, planning a comeback." Bitter laughter rippled through the group. Hitler was dead. Germany was destroyed. The Thousand-Year Reich had lasted 12 years and ended in rubble. Only the most delusional still believed in victory. "So we're propaganda," Margarine said flatly. "Show the Germans how wonderful America is. Send us home to spread the message. Or," Morrison countered, "show you that we're people, not monsters, that maybe everything you were told about us was as much a lie as everything you were told about winning the war." Before we discover what these women found in the streets of New Orleans, tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience who values these hidden stories of transformation and humanity. During wartime. Elsa studied Morrison carefully. The American was maybe 25, young for an officer with sharp eyes that suggested intelligence and experience beyond her years. She carried no weapon, showed no fear of the 16 German prisoners under her supervision. "Where are we going exactly?" Elsa asked. "Dinner first, a restaurant in the French Quarter called Antoine." Then Morrison smiled wider. "If you're brave enough, a jazz club called Preservation Hall Jazz." Margaret spat the word like a curse. "Degenerate Negro music, we were taught. It corrupts the soul, destroys discipline. Then it's a good thing." "You're not soldiers anymore," Morrison said mildly. "You're just women who happen to like music or hate it. Either way, you'll form your own opinion instead of repeating what you were told to think." The gate opened. Beyond it, New Orleans spread out in the late afternoon heat. Narrow streets lined with iron lace balconies, buildings painted in colors had never seen on German architecture, the smell of something cooking. That made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. "Last chance to refuse," Morrison said. "Anyone who'd rather stay in camp speak now." Silence. Even the most skeptical prisoners leaned forward, drawn by curiosity, by the promise of something different, by the simple human need to see beyond barbed wire. "Then follow me," Morrison said, stepping through the gate. "Welcome to New Orleans. Ladies, try not to look too shocked by everything blame." The streets of the French Quarter assaulted Elsa's senses in ways she couldn't process. Color everywhere, not the gray and brown of bombed German cities, but vibrant blues and yellows and reds on building facades. Music drifting from open windows, not martial hymns, but something loose and improvised that seemed to have no fixed rhythm. And people, so many people, black and white, moving together on sidewalks, something that would have been unthinkable under the laws she'd grown up with. Stay together. Morrison called, leading the group down Bourbon Street. And try not to stare too obviously, you're making the locals nervous. Elsa realized she was staring. They all were 16 German women in simple prison dresses, moving through an American city like ghosts visiting another dimension. Children ran past laughing. A man played trumpet on a corner, his case open for coins. Two elderly women argued in rapid French about something that made them both laugh. "This is New Orleans?" asked young Sophie Weber, barely 19, captured while working in a field hospital. "This is America." "This is one piece of America," Morrison corrected. "Just like Munich, isn't all of Germany? Countries are bigger than any one place, any one experience in Germany. We were told American cities were cold, mechanical, without culture or soul." Margaret said, her voice uncertain, for the first time, that Americans only cared about money and machinery. "And you believe that?" Morrison asked. "We believed what we were told to believe, just like you did." Morrison stopped walking, turned to face Margaret directly. "Fair point, we were told. Germans were all mindless automatons following evil orders without question. Looks like propaganda works both directions, doesn't it?" An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Then Sophie laughed, a nervous, startled sound that seemed to surprise her. "We're all idiots, aren't we? Germans and Americans, both believing our governments, our newspapers, our leaders." "Welcome to the human condition," Morrison said dryly. "Everyone who's ever lived, now come on. Antoine is 2 blocks over, and I promised them 16 hungry women at 1,800 hours." They walked deeper into the quarter. Past shops selling things couldn't identify. Past restaurants with menus written in French. Past bars where men drank openly at outdoor tables. No one seemed to be working, no one seemed to be starving. The war had touched America, certainly, but not like this. Not with destruction, not with occupation, not with the complete erasure of everything familiar. "Do you hate us, Elsa?" asked Morrison suddenly, "for the war? For what Germany did?" Morrison considered the question carefully. "I hate what happened. I hate that men like my brother died in France fighting an enemy who thought they were building paradise." "But hate you specifically?" She shook her head. "You're just women who believed the wrong men at the wrong time. That's not unique to Germany. Your brother died in France, Normandy, June 7, 1944. Day after D-Day." Morrison's voice stayed level, controlled. "He was 20 years old, wanted to be a teacher after the war, never got the chance." Elsa felt something twist in her chest, guilt perhaps, or recognition. "I had a brother too, Blouse. He died at Stalingrad. He was supposed to marry his sweetheart, have children, take over my father's pharmacy. Instead, he froze to death in Russia, fighting a war we should have known we'd lose." "I'm sorry, are you?" "We were enemies." "We were," Morrison agreed. "But your brother and mine, they were just boys who died because old men made bad decisions. Being enemies doesn't mean I can't be sorry for your loss." They reached Antoine's restaurant, its elegant facade promising luxury Elsa hadn't experienced in years. A Norman in a crisp uniform opened the door, greeting Morrison by name, showing no surprise at the 16 German prisoners in her wake. Inside the restaurant was everything Elsa remembered from before the war: white tablecloths, crystal glasses, the soft murmur of sophisticated conversation. A waiter led them to a private room where 2 long tables had been set with more silverware than seemed necessary. "I don't understand," Sophie whispered. "Why are they treating us like this? We're prisoners." "You're guests tonight," Morrison said. "Tomorrow you'll be prisoners again, but tonight you're just women having dinner in a nice restaurant. Try to enjoy it." The menu was entirely in French, which Margaret translated with obvious discomfort. Each dish seemed more elaborate than the last: oysters, Rockefeller turtle soup, pompano on Papist baked Alaska food that belonged in another lifetime, another world. "This is obscene," muttered Hilda Schaefer, the oldest prisoner, at 42, former administrative officer. "People are starving in Europe, in Germany, and Americans eat like kings." "Americans eat like Americans," Morrison corrected from the head of the table. "Some areas have rationing, sure, but we weren't bombed into rubble. Our factories kept running, our farms kept producing." "That's not obscene, that's just geography and luck." "Luck," Hilda repeated bitterly. "Easy to call it luck. When you're on the winning side, you think we feel lucky." Morrison's voice sharpened. 400,000 American soldiers died in this war, millions more wounded, traumatized, changed forever. We won, yes, but victory isn't the same as luck, and it sure as hell doesn't feel like winning when you're visiting your brother's grave. The table fell silent. Elsa watched Morrison struggle to control her emotions, watched her carefully smooth her napkin, focus on the water glass in front of her. Grief looked the same in every language, apparently. "I apologize," Hilda said quietly. "That was thoughtless." Morrison nodded without speaking. The waiter appeared with the first course, setting small plates of something that looked like rocks but smelled divine. "Oysters, Rockefeller." Morrison explained her composure, returning a New Orleans specialty. "Just try it. If you hate it, order something else." Elsa picked up the strange pronged fork, examined the oyster skeptically. Beside her, Margaret did the same. They exchanged glances, two women who'd survived anti-aircraft duty interrogation and Atlantic crossing in a cargo hold. Surely they could survive American seafood. Elsa took a bite. The flavor exploded across her tongue, salt and butter and something green and rich that tasted nothing like the heavy German dishes she'd grown up with. It was strange, unfamiliar, absolutely delicious. Around the table, similar reactions. Sophie's eyes widened in surprise. Even Hilda managed a small smile. Only Margaret remained stone-faced, determinedly not enjoying herself. "It's acceptable," Margaret said stiffly. "High praise." Morrison replied with barely concealed amusement. "Wait until you try the turtle soup." The meal progressed through courses Elsa couldn't have imagined during the gray years of war. Rationing each dish seemed designed to challenge everything she thought she knew about American food, American culture, American people. This wasn't the mechanical, soulless enemy she'd been taught to hate. This was art on a plate, prepared by people who cared about flavor and presentation and the simple joy of eating. "Well, why jazz?" Elsa asked Morrison between courses. "You could have taken us anywhere, museums, parks, churches. Why a jazz club?" Morrison set down her fork, considering the question, "Because jazz is the most American thing I can think of. It's black musicians taking African rhythms and European instruments and creating something entirely new. It's improvisation and freedom and rules that get broken in beautiful ways. Furthermore, it's everything Germany tried to stamp out: individuality, creativity, different cultures mixing together." "And you want to prove we were wrong," Margaret said, "about degenerate music, inferior races, all of it. I want you to hear it and decide for yourself." Morrison corrected, "Not what I tell you to think, not what Hitler told you to think, what you actually think when you listen without prejudice. That's impossible. Everyone has prejudice. Everyone has prejudice." Morrison agreed, but not everyone is brave enough to examine it. Tonight you get to choose: be brave or be comfortable. Learn something new or cling to old. Lies up to you. Dessert arrived. The famous baked Alaska meringue torched, golden brown ice cream hidden inside. Elsa took a bite and wondered how ice cream could exist inside something hot. The contradiction seemed symbolic somehow. Hot and cold together, enemy and friend sharing a meal, impossible combinations that turned out to be real. "The jazz club?" Sophie asked nervously. Will there be? Will we be the only white people there? Morrison's expression hardened slightly. There will be black musicians and mixed audiences. If that makes you uncomfortable, you can return to camp now. Sophie looked terrified but shook her head. No, I want to hear the music, I've never been around. She trailed off, unable to finish around black people as equals. Morrison finished bluntly, well, you're about to be, and here's the thing, they're going to be more uncomfortable with you than you are with them, because while Germans were bombing London, America had its own ugly truths, segregation, lynchings, black soldiers fighting for a country that treats them like second-class citizens. She leaned forward. So when we walk into Preservation Hall, you remember that those musicians don't owe you anything, especially not Germans who spent years claiming racial superiority. The rebuke stung because it was true. Elsa had grown up with those teachings, absorbed them like everyone else one. She'd never questioned them until she'd seen the camps, heard the rumors, understood what racial purity actually meant in practice. I'll be respectful, Elsa said quietly. We all will. Good. Morrison said, standing. Then let's go hear some degenerate music, see if it actually corrupts your souls, like they promised. Biz, a Preservation Hall sat on a narrow street in the French Quarter. Its exterior, modest, almost shabby. Nothing about the building suggested the transformation. Waiting inside, a small sign by the door listed the evening's performers, Louise Armstrong's protégés. It read doors at 2000 hours. A line of people stretched down the block, white and black, young and old, soldiers in uniform and civilians in their Sunday best. When Morrison led the German prisoners to the entrance, conversation stopped. Eyes followed them with open curiosity and barely concealed hostility. Keep walking. Morrison said quietly, don't engage, don't react. A black man in a military uniform stepped forward, blocking their path. His ribbons indicated combat service. His expression indicated no patience for German prisoners on his streets. These the enemy, he asked Morrison, his voice hard. The ones who thought they were the master race. These are prisoners participating in a cultural exchange program. Morrison replied carefully, authorized by the State Department, State Department. The man repeated mockingly, while black soldiers come home, to the same Jim Crow laws we left while we fought for freedom overseas, and don't have it here. But sure, let's educate the Germans about American culture. Elsa felt the weight of his anger, understood it completely. What right did she have to be here enjoying music, eating fine food, while this man, this veteran who'd fought against her country, faced discrimination in his own homeland? You're right, Elsa said in careful English, stepping forward. We don't deserve this, any of this. We believe terrible things did terrible things. Nothing I can say will change that. The man studied her carefully. Then why are you here? Because Lieutenant Morrison thinks we can learn that maybe understanding prevents the next war. Elsa met his eyes directly. I don't know if that's true, but I know I want to hear the music your people created. I want to understand what we were taught to hate. Silence stretched between them. Finally, the man nodded slowly. Then you better listen, well, German girl, because this music it's about surviving what can't be survived. It's about finding joy when joy shouldn't be possible. It's about being human when the world says you're not. He stepped aside. Maybe you understand that better than most white folks. Morrison ushered them inside quickly. The hall was small, intimate, with rough wooden benches facing a simple stage. Maybe 50 people could fit comfortably. Tonight, 70 crowded in. The German prisoners were given seats near the back, away from the stage, away from the other patrons who watched them with varying degrees of hostility and curiosity. Elsa sat on the hard bench, her heart hammering around her. The other prisoners fidgeted nervously. Even Margaret looked uncertain, her usual rigid confidence, shaken by the intensity of the moment. The lights dimmed. 5 musicians took the stage, piano, trumpet, clarinet, bass, drums, all black men, ranging from a teenager on drums to an elderly man with the trumpet. They sat without ceremony, without introduction, without any acknowledgement of the audience. Then the pianist struck a chord and the world changed. The music started slow, almost mournful, a blues progression that seemed to pull sorrow from the air itself. The trumpet joined its tone, rough and weathered, speaking in a language Elsa didn't know but somehow understood. Then the clarinet added layers, the bass provided foundation and the drums God. The drums drove everything forward with a heartbeat rhythm that bypassed her brain entirely and went straight to her soul. This wasn't the rigid military marches she'd grown up with. This wasn't the precise classical music she'd studied in school. This was chaos and order, intertwined structure and improvisation, married into something alive, something that breathed and changed and demanded. You feel it rather than think it. Beside her, Sophie began crying quietly across the aisle. Even Margaret's hard expression had softened into something like wonder. Hilda gripped the bench so hard her knuckles went white. The tempo increased. The trumpet player stood his solo, soaring over the foundation, the others provided. He played notes that shouldn't work together, bent melodies in ways that defied theory and created beauty that made Elsa's chest ache. This was freedom translated into sound. This was everything she'd been taught to fear and suppress and destroy. And it was magnificent. The music didn't stop for 30 minutes straight. Each song flowed into the next, without pause, without explanation, just pure expression translated through instruments. The trumpet player, Morrison, whispered. His name was Chester, studied under Armstrong, himself played with his eyes closed, his body swaying, completely lost in the melody. The pianist attacked his keys like they'd insulted him, coaxing rage and joy and sorrow from ivory and wood. The drummer was barely 16, but played with the wisdom of someone who'd lived a dozen lifetimes. Elsa watched her fellow prisoners react. Sophie swayed unconsciously, her body responding to rhythms. Her mind didn't understand. Hilda's stern expression had crumbled entirely, tears streaming down her weathered face. Even Margaret, rigid Margaret, who'd maintained military bearing through surrender and captivity, sat with her mouth slightly open, her breathing synchronized to the bassline. This was what they'd been taught to fear. This was degenerate music created by inferior people. This was everything the Reich said would corrupt and destroy civilization. And it was the most honest, most human, most alive thing Elsa had heard in her entire life. The song changed faster, now more aggressive. The clarinet player took the lead, his notes cascading over each other in impossible patterns. The audience responded clapping in rhythm, calling out encouragement. A few people stood to dance, despite the cramped space. Their movements loose and improvised, nothing like the rigid folk dances Elsa had learned in youth programs. "They're free," Elsa whispered to Morrison. "They're all free." Morrison nodded. That's what jazz is, freedom in musical form, the ability to take a structure and make it your own, to improvise, to experiment, to fail and recover and keep playing. "We were never allowed to fail," Elsa said in Germany. Failure meant weakness, weakness meant elimination. And how did that work out? The question hung in the air between them. Elsa thought about the 1,000-year Reich that lasted 12 years, about the perfect society built on genocide, about the strength that turned out to be brittle, breaking under the first real pressure. Not well, Elsa admitted. The music reached a crescendo, all 5 instruments converging on a single sustained note that seemed to vibrate through the wooden benches, through their bones, through everything. Then silence, complete, absolute silence that felt louder than the music had been. The audience erupted, applause, whistles, stomping feet. The German prisoners sat frozen, unsure if they were allowed to join. Then Sophie started clapping, hesitantly at first, then with real enthusiasm. Hilda followed, then others, even Margaret managed a few polite claps. Chester, the trumpet player, noticed. He smiled, not warmly, not welcoming, but acknowledging he'd seen them, these German prisoners, clapping for black musicians in New Orleans. He'd witnessed the contradiction, the impossibility, the small crack in the wall of everything they'd been taught. "Thank you," he said into the microphone, his voice, "Rally, we got one more for you tonight. This one's called When the Saints Go Marching In. It's about hope, about believing in something better, even when everything says there's nothing left to believe in. If you're moved by these stories of transformation and unexpected humanity, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. Share this with anyone who needs to remember that change is possible, that prejudice can be unlearned, that music speaks truths governments can't silence." The song started gentle, almost hip-like. Elsa recognized the melody. She'd heard it somewhere before, maybe in a radio broadcast, maybe in a dream. The clarinet carried the tune while the other instruments provided soft accompaniment. It felt like a prayer, like hope translated into sound. Then the tempo increased, the drums drove harder, the trumpet soared, the piano attacked, and suddenly it wasn't a gentle prayer anymore, it was a declaration, it was defiance, it was 50 years of oppression transformed into joy that couldn't be suppressed or destroyed. Elsa stood without thinking around her. Other prisoners stood too, not in military precision, not following orders, just responding to something primal that transcended nationality and ideology. They stood because the music demanded it, because sitting felt like a lie. The audience stood with them, barriers dissolving in the heat and music, and shared human experience. Black and white, American and German, victor and defeated. All of them, just people responding to beauty that refused to be categorized or controlled. When the song ended, when the final note faded into sacred silence, Elsa understood something fundamental. They'd lost the war not because of military failure, but because they'd been fighting against this, against freedom, against improvisation, against the messy, unpredictable, magnificent chaos of actual humanity. You couldn't defeat jazz with tanks. You couldn't bomb freedom into submission. Furthermore, you couldn't build a 1,000-year Reich on the foundation of controlling what people felt when they heard music. The musicians left the stage without ceremony. The lights came up, reality returned, but Elsa would never be the same. Indeed, Morrison gave them 30 minutes after the performance to decompress her word, for standing on the street outside Preservation Hall trying to process what they'd experienced. Some prisoners cried, some laughed, some just stood in stunned silence looking at New Orleans, like they were seeing the world for the first time. That was. Sophie started, then stopped, unable to find words. I don't know what that was. That was everything they told us didn't exist. Hilda said quietly, beauty from people they said were incapable of creating beauty. Sophistication from people they said were primitive. Genius from people they said were inferior. They lied. Margaret said flatly. The admission seemed to cost her something essential about all of it. They lied. Morrison watched them from near the doorway, giving them space to grapple with revelation. After several minutes she approached Elsa specifically. There's someone who wants to meet you, Morrison said. Chester, the trumpet player, he heard you're the ranking officer among the prisoners. Elsa's stomach clenched. Why would he want to meet me? Because he has questions and because I think you have answers you need to give. Chester waited in a small courtyard behind the hall smoking a cigarette, his trumpet case at his feet, up close. He looked older than he'd appeared on stage, maybe 50, with gray threading through his hair and deep lines around his eyes. He studied Elsa with an expression she couldn't read. You're the German officer, he said, not a question. Former officer, Corporal Elsa Brewer. Anti-aircraft artillery. You shoot down any of our planes? The blunt question deserved an honest answer. I don't know. We fired at many targets. I don't know what we hit. Chester nodded slowly. At least you're honest. Most white folks would lie, make excuses. He took a drag from his cigarette. What did you think of the music? I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, Elsa said, and I think I was taught to hate it because it represented everything my government feared. And what was that? Freedom, individuality, the idea that rules could be broken in beautiful ways. Chester laughed a harsh, bitter sound. You know what's funny? I fought for this country, France, Belgium, saw things no man should see. Come home and still can't eat in half the restaurants in this city, still get called boy by white men half my age, still have to use different bathrooms, different water fountains. He looked directly at Elsa. So tell me, German girl, what exactly did you lose that we won? The question gutted her because he was right. Americans had defeated Nazi Germany, but they hadn't defeated racism, hadn't defeated injustice, hadn't built the perfect society they'd claimed to be fighting for. I don't know, Elsa admitted. I thought there were good sides and bad sides, clear lines, but maybe there are just different kinds of wrong. Now you're learning. Chester ground out his cigarette. But here's the thing, we keep playing anyway. We keep creating beauty, even when the world says we shouldn't exist. We keep improvising, because improvisation is survival. That's what jazz is really about, not freedom from rules, but making your own rules when the world's rules are designed to destroy you. Is that what you wanted to tell me? No, Chester picked up his trumpet case. I wanted to tell you that I saw you crying during When the Saints. I saw all you German women standing up when you didn't have to, and I want you to remember that feeling, that moment when music made you human. Again, and take it back to whatever's left of Germany. He started walking away, then paused, because if Germans can learn to hear jazz, really hear it, maybe there's hope for this whole damn species. He disappeared into the night, leaving Elsa standing in the courtyard with tears streaming down her face. Morrison approached quietly, giving her a handkerchief. He lost his brother at Anzio. Morrison said softly, fighting Germans, he has every right to hate you, but he doesn't. Elsa realized he pies us because we lost something more important than the war. What's that? Our humanity, our ability to hear music and just feel it, without analyzing it, without categorizing it, without determining if it's politically acceptable. Elsa wiped her eyes. When did we become so afraid of beauty? Morrison didn't answer because there was no answer. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she checked her watch. We need to get back 2,200 hours deadline. But Elsa Morrison touched her arm. What you experienced tonight, that's available to you. After repatriation, after everything settles, America accepts immigrants, people who want to build new lives, embrace new possibilities. You're saying I should stay in America. I'm saying you have choices. Maybe for the first time in your life you actually get to choose your own future instead of following orders. Morrison smiled slightly. Think about it, but not too long. We've got a curfew to make. They gathered the other prisoners and began the walk back to Cam Acres. The streets of New Orleans had quieted, but music still drifted from open windows, from distant clubs, from the city itself. Elsa walked in silence, her mind replaying the evening, the music, Chester's words. Beside her, Sophie spoke quietly, I don't want to go back the camp, to Germany, to everything we left, to being the people we were before. Tonight. Elsa understood completely because somewhere between Antoine's restaurant and Preservation Hall, between Oysters, Rockefeller and When the Saints Go Marching In, she'd stopped being Corporal Elsa Brewer of the German Wehrmacht and become just Elsa, a woman who'd heard jazz and understood what freedom actually meant. The question now was, could she hold on to that understanding, or would it fade like music, fades leaving only memory and longing? Cam Acres felt different when they returned, the same barbed wire, the same guard towers, the same barracks. But Elsa saw it all through new eyes. This wasn't a prison. This was a waiting room, a temporary stop between the life she'd left and whatever came next. The other prisoners, those who'd remained in camp, crowded around, immediately demanding details. What was the city like? The food, the music? Were the Americans cruel, hostile, dangerous? They were human, Margaret said simply. That single word seemed to encompass everything, explain everything, change everything. In the barracks that night, Elsa lay on her thin mattress and stared at the surrounding ceiling. 15 other women processed the evening in their own ways. Some cried quietly, some wrote letters they'd never send, some just lay in stunned silence. "Do you think it's real?" Sophie whispered from the next bunk. "Or was tonight just propaganda? Show the prisoners how wonderful America is, make them forget what we're going back to." "Does it matter?" Elsa asked. "Whether it's propaganda or truth. We heard the music. We felt what we felt. No one can take that away, but we're still going back to Germany to rubble and occupation and shame. Maybe, or maybe we're going back with something. Germany lost the memory of what beauty sounds like when it's free." A voice came from across the barracks, Margaret, speaking into the darkness. "I joined the band Deutsche Maiden when I was 10. I believed everything. They taught us, racial superiority, labels from, the destiny of the German people. I reported my own teacher to authorities when she said Hitler was dangerous. I was proud of that. Furthermore, I thought I was serving my country." Silence, no one interrupted. Everyone understood this was confession, penance, reckoning. "Tonight," Margaret continued, "I heard a black musician play trumpet, like angels sing, and I understood that everything I believed, everything I reported, everything I was proud of, all of it, was lies built on fear. We weren't the master race, we were just frightened people following a frightened man into darkness." "So what do we do now?" asked Hilda. "We can't undo what we've done, can't bring back the dead, can't rebuild what we destroyed. We can listen," Elsa said, "we can remember, and when we're repatriated, when we're back in Germany trying to build something from the ruins, we can tell people what we learned, that freedom sounds like jazz, that beauty comes from places we were taught to fear, that humanity is bigger than nationality." "They'll never believe us," Sophie said. "Some will, and some of those will tell others. And slowly, maybe Germany remembers how to be human instead of trying to be superior." Morrison appeared in the barracks doorway making her final rounds. "Lights out in 5 minutes, ladies and brewer. Captain wants to see you in the morning. Something about an application." After Morrison left, Sophie pressed, "What application?" Elsa hadn't told anyone yet, hadn't decided herself, but lying in the darkness listening to 15 other women breathing, she knew the truth. "Immigration application," Elsa said quietly. "Lieutenant Morrison told me about it. After repatriation is finalized, after Germany is stabilized, there's a program for displaced persons, people who want to start over in America." "You'd stay?" Margaret sounded shocked. "After everything, after they bombed our cities, killed our soldiers, destroyed our country, Germany destroyed Germany," Elsa corrected gently. "GY chose war, chose genocide, chose insanity. America just finished what we started, and now America is offering something Germany never did, a chance to choose my own future. What about your family?" Elsa thought about her parents in Munich, her sister in Hamburg. She'd received one letter in 3 years, delivered through Red Cross channels. "We have no daughter named Elsa. You died when you joined the military. Do not contact us again." "I have no family in Germany," Elsa said. "Not anymore, but maybe I can build one here, in the place where jazz is legal, where beauty isn't political. Where I can be human without apologizing for it." Lights out came, darkness fell. 16 women lay in silence, each processing transformation in their own way. Outside, guard towers swept searchlights across the compound. Beyond the fence, New Orleans slept and dreamed and prepared for another day of impossible music. Ilya closed her eyes and heard it all again, the trumpet's cry, the piano's thunder, the drums' heartbeat. She heard Chester's message, keep improvising, because improvisation is survival. She heard Morrison's offer, you have choices now. And she heard her own answer, clear and certain, in the darkness, yes, tomorrow she'd fill out the immigration application, she'd formally request asylum in the United States. Citing the cultural exchange program as evidence of her willingness to integrate. She'd wait months or years for approval, would face scrutiny and suspicion, would struggle with language and culture and the weight of being former enemy in a victorious nation. But she'd heard jazz, she'd tasted freedom, she'd been reminded that humanity is bigger than nationality, that beauty transcends borders, that the world is wider than any ideologies. Definition. Germany had taught her to follow orders, America, specifically New Orleans, on one impossible September evening, had taught her to improvise. She'd choose improvisation every time for the rest of her life, because that's what jazz taught her. When the structure fails, when the old rules don't work, when everything you believe turns out to be lies, you don't stop playing, you improvise, you create, you find beauty in chaos, you survive and, maybe impossibly, you find freedom in the places you were taught to fear. Thank you for joining us on this journey through hidden history. If these untold stories move you, please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that transformation is possible, that prejudice can be unlearned, that beauty exists in unexpected places. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity across all borders and conflicts. The past has lessons for today, if we're brave enough to